Molly, there's a topic we've been wanting to talk about for a while, and the spotlight's going to be on you today. The topic is a little sensitive, so I want to put that warning out there to our listeners because what we want to discuss with you is brain donation, and you have firsthand experience with that with your Aunt Kathy. So I know this can be a little bit tough for some people. It might be a little bit emotional. However, we all think it's so important for people to know about this. It's not something that I knew about with my brother, and I think it would have changed my thinking about it, and maybe even we would have made a different decision personally in our family. So we really think it's something necessary to talk about.
Absolutely. And I can kind of like piggyback on that, Kristen. I'm writing my book on Down syndrome and Alzheimer's, and I've interviewed quite a few families, and there were very few that were even aware that brain donation is an option, or they had no clue about how to do it. And we're glad that I even brought it up because it gave them, the impetus to at least start doing some research. And I found something, and this is why I can't wait to talk to Molly, who's actually done this. I went to a training that was provided by an Alzheimer's association, and they had vendors there. I guess that would be what you'd call them, resources. And there were 2 tables at this meeting that had options for brain donation. When I talked to them about donating the brain of someone with Down syndrome, they were like, we don't know anything about that. We can't do that. We don't want to even explore that. So finding someone that could do that, I think it kind of stopped me from looking any further. And I'm at a point now where I probably need to be thinking about this. So, Molly, how did you ever figure this out? And I mean, you're like a pioneer with this.
So it was early on in Kathy's journey that I thought about it. I wanted to think about it before the time came, and I wanted to talk to my family about it before a crisis hit. So Kathy has 6 siblings. She's the youngest of 7, and they were all very involved in her care. And I knew that any conversation was going to be a long conversation over time and have to get a lot of people's buy-in. I also didn't know all of my aunts and uncles' feelings about medical donation, body donation, organ donation, whatever you want to call it. So I started looking into it. I asked some support groups about it early on. I think it was like a year into Kathy's diagnosis, and crickets. Like nobody was giving me any information, just from peers. So I started looking online into like the Alzheimer's Association and other brain banks. And then I made my mom take that job up. I delegated that job to her because I was starting to get like neck deep in caring for Kathy. She, luckily, she was very willing to talk about it. She was really interested in the idea. And I will say it turned out all of my aunts and uncles were really amenable to the idea too. I think they really liked it. And part of that is because I think Kathy and my grandparents were such pioneers for so long. I mean, she was born in 1961, and everything they did was new. There was no intervention. There was no special education. There was nothing. And so their entire lives were spent building the ladder for the people behind them. And I think that is the ethos behind something like brain donation. It's not going to help our loved ones, but it might help the people who come up behind us. And if anything, like if that's all that can happen, then at least her suffering, this disease and her death would not have been in vain. And it's why we do this podcast, right?
Right.
That's why we're all
Absolutely.
doing it.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, it's really, truly remarkable, though, I do have to say, because of the age of your aunt and back-to-back ages. She's the youngest of 7, you said, right? So
yes, she's the youngest by 10 years.
Right. So really, I commend your mom and her siblings for getting on board with this. I mean, they really are pioneers, because I think that can be a really hard thing to wrap your mind around with trying to shift over to that. We're going to donate our sister's brain.
Yes.
And, that's, I mean, just generationally, I think that's hard. It's hard enough as it is, even for me to think about that, right? If we would have done that with Matthew or JD and you thinking about it. So I think it's truly remarkable that they got on board with that. And I know people are going to have the questions though, like how did you approach that conversation? I mean, can you give any specifics to the conversation? Was there any pushback on it? And if there was, what was that? But then what I really want to know, because I know you've shared the story with us before, but not in detail, what are the steps to doing that? Like what has to happen, because it's so specific and time sensitive, right?
One other thing that I was thinking about, and it's something that came up when we switched the guardianship of Matt from myself to his current guardian, was that I cannot legally sign a DNR for Matt. So as I was thinking about this particular episode, that was one of the things that I thought about was like, are there legal repercussions about, and who has the authority, especially if there's a guardian? I don't know if Kathy had a guardian or if she was her own spokesperson, so to speak. But
Kathy was her own guardian. My mom was her medical power of attorney, her whatever you want to call that.
right.
And then her brother was her durable power of attorney, but she was her own guardian. To answer the first question, the conversation, it was a conversation that my mom had with her siblings alone. I was not privy to it, but I did hear from all of them that it was the easiest conversation of any of the conversations that they had about Kathy. So surprisingly and thankfully, it was a no-brainer for all of them. Turns out my aunt and uncle had done the same thing for his father, who had dementia, when he passed away, I think probably in the 80s or 90s. So this was not, surprisingly, this was not a problem for anybody in my family. So I cannot give any tips from my experience as to how to make that conversation go better. All I can tell you is that you could be surprised by how easy it can go.
Fair enough.
Right. Believe me, I was expecting, rightfully so, I was expecting it to be a very emotional process. And luckily, everyone who had a say said yes right away. And so then it just became a more practical task of trying to find the right place to go, who would take it, and how to do it. So I can jump right into that if you want.
Yeah, I think I remember you had said you looked into several different programs that do brain donations, and so it was a process.
It was. And we looked into like the big ones, the brain bank, the Alzheimer's one, and then some local ones. And the biggest surprise that we found out was that they all said, if she dies at home, it's going to be really hard to do. And so if this is really important to you, you're going to want to either put her into a hospice facility or when the end comes near, put her into the hospital, because they said the brain needs to be harvested within an hour for it to be usable in their research. And even if the person dies at the hospital, sometimes it's hard to get it within that hour window. I do think there were some that was like, we could do it in 2 hours, but still we're not comfortable with her dying at home. And that was heartbreaking for me. And I think it was heartbreaking for my mom because we both really wanted to do that. We both really wanted to do brain donation, but we both also really wanted her to be able to die at home. And I remember getting a little bit weepy and asking my mom, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? And does that mean that as soon as she dies, like, I can't call you guys to come over? Like, I have to call them first and they have to take her. Like, I don't get a chance to hold her hand. What an awful choice that we would have to make then. So at that point, Kathy's doctor found a contact at an organization called ABCDS, which is the Alzheimer's Biomarker Consortium for Down syndrome. So ABCDS. Kathy's doctor sent my mom the contact information for that woman, and it's a study, it's a research organization that is devoted to Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. And they said, oh my gosh, we will take her brain no matter how long it's been in her head after she dies, and she can die at home, and we will arrange everything. And don't you worry, it's fine. You can have the death that you want for her, and we can still take her brain, and it will still be useful and helpful to others. And so that was an answer to a prayer for us. I can go on from there, or if you want to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, I think that alone is that specific to their program? Is that what you're saying? That they can?
Yes, from what we found from our research, that was the only place that was saying you can die at home and there's no risk of her brain not being usable.
Okay.
Now, to be clear, the other people said, some people said you cannot, like you have to be at a hospital if you want to donate brain. Other people said it's fine if you want her to die at home, but just know that her brain might not be usable after an hour.
Right.
And I didn't want, like, that was a terrible answer for me, because it was like, well, I don't want to have to think about that happening to her and then it not, and then it be a waste, you know? So anyway, that was really nice. And they were the only place that said that. And I do believe this is true across programs, but at least for this program, they took care of absolutely everything. So my mom contacted the woman there, and I think maybe we should have them on at some point for
I think that would be great.
a podcast episode with them, because they can answer a lot better than I can about some of this stuff. But from our standpoint, we had her name and we had her office number and her cell phone number. She did all the legwork. She contacted our local hospital. She contacted our doctor, and she arranged everything. She talked to the county coroner. She talked to the funeral home. She arranged everything on her end. The only thing we had to do on our end was make sure that her name and her number was in a central location with all the emergency contact. After Kathy this is what she told us ahead of time. After Kathy was pronounced dead, either the hospice nurse or I would need to call her so that she could start the protocol. And then everything would happen behind the scenes without us even having to step into it, which was really nice.
Yes.
But like you said, Jadine, there did need to be, well, actually, I don't know if there had to be, but we did end up signing a very specific type of DNR. And maybe this is also a subject for another episode, but that actually, the DNR ended up being a longer process and conversation with my family than the brain donation.
That's an interesting thing to look at, because Matt's guardian can do a DNR. We just have to go to the court. And I don't know at what point we have to do that. It's something that I need to look into. It's like, could we set it up now, or do we have to wait until he's coming to end of life and then go to court on an emergency and do that? I don't know. That it just opens a lot of questions.
Or at least in Ohio, you can do it whenever you want. I mean, I can have a DNR right now. I can sign my own.
Well, I can too.
Right?
It's the fact that Matt has a guardian that makes it complicated.
Right. So
and has to go through the court.
Right. Then,
Yeah.
So I guess I would suggest you do it before you need to.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to wait, because when Kathy's doctor gave us the form to fill out, there were two different versions. At least in Ohio, there was like a do not resuscitate for your heart and a do not resuscitate for your heart and your breathing, or something like that.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
And it was very confusing the way it was written. There was a lot of conversation around both of those. And there was a lot of emotion around that too, just from a religious aspect from my family, and, you know, an ethical standpoint. All of those questions come up, you know, when is dead, those kinds of, those kinds of awful questions that you have to actually like ask yourself, because we don't know what shape the end is going to take, and we don't know what it is that's going to take our loved ones. And it could be a complicated, tricky situation. Luckily for us, it wasn't. It was pretty clean cut. But we did have that order. We did have that standing order, I think, a year before Kathy passed away. I know. Do you know what? It's because we found out you have to for hospice.
You have to have
right.
a DNR for hospice?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. So I think that was what we had talked about it beforehand. And because it was so difficult, we kept putting it on the shelf. And when it was time for us to start seriously looking at hospice is when we found out they won't take you unless you have that signed.
Right. Because part of their philosophy is we're not going to do life-saving
We're not going
measures.
to
We're
prolong
going
it. Yeah.
to make you as comfortable and, you know, in little pain as possible and keep you comfortable.
Right. So actually, you know, but the way, at least in Ohio, the way that it was worded was so confusing that I was asking questions like, well, what happens if she's choking? I'm going to do the Heimlich on her.
Mm-hmm.
Does that count? Like, what does not breathing mean? Right. That doesn't mean she's dying. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway.
Joe and I both, Joe had a DNR. And we both took it, and it could be the way it's written in Florida. I don't know. I haven't looked at mine for quite some time. But if I were sick and the probability is I could get well and I choked on a chicken sandwich,
Right.
resuscitate me.
Right.
But if I have a terminal illness and I'm at the end of that terminal illness and I choke on that chicken sandwich,
Let it happen.
Let me go. Bye.
Well, so I was worried.
so
I was worried. I was like, you guys, I don't know that I'm going to be able to stop myself from giving her the Heimlich. I really don't. Like, it had happened a couple times and I did it before I even thought. So I had to tell her, I'm like, sign what you want, but I don't know if I can stop myself. Now, I can stop myself from like doing the paddles on her if she has a heart attack. I can stop the EMTs from doing CPR, but I don't think I can stop myself from like saving her if she's choking. Anyway.
well, that's a good point.
That-
I'm going
yeah.
to put that in, make sure I write that in and initial it.
If I'm having a really bad day, let me go.
That's got to be more than a bad day.
Okay.
All right, so let's recenter. So you've made the decision as a family that you want to donate Kathy's brain after she passes. You let the organization know. You found the organization that you like. You let them know. They in turn start getting all the paperwork and things ready. You have access to the number of the person you're going to call as soon as she passes. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and then what happens after that? So, and you know, you can get into as little or as much detail as you want, but I'm trying to paint the picture.
Yeah. So then we lived for 2 years with her number on the refrigerator, or 3 years or whatever, you know, however long Kathy lived beyond us making that decision. And then it came time for her.
And then, right, so she died in
Yes.
the home as you had
Right.
wanted her to do.
Yes, exactly. So
Yes.
she was able to pass away at home. We had the hospice nurse here that day. She was in and out. After Kathy passed away, to tell you the truth, I don't remember who called her. I can't remember if it was me or if it was my mom or if it was the nurse, but I think it was either me or my mom. Isn't that funny, the way memory
Yeah.
works? I don't know who called her, but somebody called her as soon as they pronounced Kathy dead. Okay, luckily, my mom and my sister were here when it happened. So luckily, everyone who wanted to see Kathy before she passed away was here at the house, and everyone was able to be around her. So there was nobody we had to call to come in and say their last goodbyes. So after she died, somebody reached out to the coordinator, and I can't remember who it was. It was probably my mom, called her to tell her, you know, Kathy had passed and to get the wheels in motion. And then those wheels were put in motion. And luckily, I don't know what happened. I don't know who they called first. I don't know who they called second. And that's by design. I think what happened after is probably what happens in any other normal circumstance. The funeral home was called and they brought a hearse to take her body away. And I do remember that initially they were going to take her to the hospital, which is pretty close for that procedure. But the transplant team was in an emergency. And so they decided to take her to the funeral home where the transplant team would go after their emergency and do the procedure there. So again, like somebody else was dealing with all of those moving parts, not us.
Right.
So the funeral home came and they took her. There were some like weird things that happened with that, but it has nothing to do with brain donation.
Well, but that's a question though. Speaking of funeral home, I had the question to you, and I would imagine people listening are going to have this question: can you still have a wake and a funeral, and how do you do
Yes.
that when you choose to donate your loved one's
Yep.
brain?
So you can even still have an open casket.
Okay.
You don't even know that it's happened. It all like gets put back together and cleaned up, and you wouldn't be any the wiser. So you can still have the funeral that you want, regardless of whether that's open casket, closed casket, cremation, whatever. It does not impact any plans in terms of the funeral or visitation or wake or whatever you want.
Okay. Which I think is really important.
It's
That
really
is important.
Yes,
it's
because when
comforting.
it is, and I know after the fact when I learned about this and I told my parents about it, they said, "Well, I don't know if we would have done it because we couldn't have done a open casket or
Right.
the wake." And so, thanks for clarifying that, because you can. It's so
You can.
important to know you can still give your loved one the send off into heaven or wherever you believe they're going, the way that you want and the way that you feel is sacred for your family.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they did all of that. And then what does that mean for the family then? What do you hear? What kind of,
Yeah.
where is it going? What are they doing with it? What's happening?
Yeah. And so I think this is where having somebody from ABCDS on might be helpful. But I'll tell you from our perspective, you have to wait a really long time. They say like 6 to 12 months, I think. But you get a report. They do a pathology report on the brain and they do a whole workup and they tell you exactly what they find. You know, what type of dementia did they find? Were there multiple types of dementia? Was there anything else that they found in her brain? And we actually just got that report, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. It came a little bit late for us because something happened where they had to redo, I don't know, the study, whatever it is that they do to the brain, they had to redo it on Kathy. And so we had to wait a little bit longer than most people, I think, but we did get that report and it's fascinating.
So what were some of the things in there? I'm so curious. I mean, do you
I need to like pull it up.
do you remember?
I will tell you, yes, I do. I remember there was one really fascinating finding is that they think she had, in addition to Alzheimer's, they think that she had a type of Lewy body dementia.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
It was really interesting. It was, I think it was like a small piece of the pie, but it was there. But it was a whole like 10 pages.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, so what they've told us is that her brain, like once it's been looked at and typed and the neuropathology has been completed, then they say, well, Kathy's brain is ready to travel, and they will send out parts of her brain or tissue samples to researchers around the country or around the world who are working on Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. And that is the beauty of it.
That's fascinating that it's not that it just went to the location that you sent it to,
Right.
but it gets shared out for people, researchers that are doing different types of research. Wow, that's interesting.
And I do think that her brain, like the bulk of her brain, probably stays in Irvine. But and that's, I guess, another thing we should say. They're based out of Irvine, but it didn't matter where in the country we were, as long as they could find a partner in your local hospital and somebody willing to do it, which they work really hard to do. You can participate.
Here's a question. How long does it take from the time you contacted ABCDS in Irvine until everything was in place? What was the time span on that?
It was fast. I don't remember. It was fast. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but it was pretty fast. Now, it was important to me that we get this sorted out and think about it while Kathy was still healthy. She had been diagnosed, but she hadn't like gone through a big decline yet, because I was worried that I didn't want to think about it when she was starting to get sick. It might have been too hard for me. And so I wanted to deal with those kind of like icky feelings and questions while I knew that we still had a good amount of time with her. But I do know so somebody reached out to me recently asking for the contact there whose daughter was declining and in the end stages. And from what I heard from her, I think it was maybe a couple weeks between when I gave her the contact information and her daughter died, and she was even able to get it all set up.
Wow.
Yeah, it did.
Wow.
Did happen
That's
very
good to know.
quickly.
So I think it all depends on where you live, meaning you don't have to be close to them, but meaning what does your local hospital system do and how cooperative are they going to be? That sort of thing, I think, is the biggest question.
Yeah. And I want to go back to something you said about making this decision while Kathy was still healthy, because I
Yeah.
think that's so important. And I want to just reiterate that those decisions are so much easier to make in a way than when they're progressing. And the only thing I would add to that is if you can, like planning the funeral, right? If you know what kind of funeral you're going to do, my advice to any family, unfortunately, we're on a one-way street with this journey, right? Make those decisions like that. Plan the funeral while your loved one is still communicative and, alert and can, be a part of things, because we did that with Matthew. And as we got closer and we knew the end was nearing, we all looked at each other and said, there's no way we could have ever been planning a funeral. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice and something takes a turn very quickly and you don't have the time to do that. But we are gifted the blessing of time with our loved ones during this journey to make these kinds of decisions and be more present in the moment. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's so important. On the Irvine piece, what I do want to add is thanks to Jadine, who introduced us to a friend who has friends that work in that program. Last year, I was out there visiting and I had the honor and the privilege to go to UC Irvine and see the brains up close and personal. And I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. And I'm just going to say this now, because I'm even getting emotional listening to you talk about this, Molly. And it's not for everyone, but it was a very emotional experience for me. But it was so moving in a way that just made me stop and realize the love that Kathy had for people in this world and people that are choosing to do this program. It truly is never ending. They're constantly still living with us and beside us in a different way now. And the fact that Kathy can be helping the next generation of people. I mean, for all I know, I was privileged and honored to see Kathy's brain. I saw a few of them there that day. And I felt some deep connection, like, wow, here they are again with this unconditional love, continuing to help others and keep giving and keep impacting the world in a way that we need. Yes. And I will tell you from the scientific standpoint, I was able to see a brain of a quote unquote typical person with Alzheimer's, and then the brain of a person with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. Wow, was there a difference? The size of the brain, the grooves in the brain. I mean, to be able to see what all of this that we're talking about looked like in real life, it just makes everything we're doing so worth it. And I wish I would have had the opportunity to talk about this experience with my mom and dad, because I think we would have come to the decision that it's the right thing to do. That being said, it's not the right thing to do for everyone. It's not the decision that everyone's going to make. It's just something out there to know about that is so important if your family chooses to go that route, because no matter what, your loved one is making a difference in this world, regardless of what you do and what they've done in their lives.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you, Molly, for sharing something that's so personal and just so important. You know, there's so many, as I'm writing the book, and I came across so many families that didn't even know this was an option. And the fact that we can really make a difference.
Yeah.
Those who choose to participate in a program like this. So thank you, Molly, for opening up and sharing these really heartfelt decisions that you and your mom and her siblings made to help.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes, I
And
was just going to
thank you,
say, and we'd be
Kathy.
remiss to not thank Kathy in this
Yeah,
episode.
absolutely.
Really, this is about Kathy and the impact she continues to
To
make.
have in this world. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you guys.